Conversations podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Conversations TNI podcast, coming to you from Wurundjeri land. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel and wherever else you get your podcast from so you can stay updated with the latest episodes. Today, we're joined by a true pioneer in the field of legal interpreting, Professor Sandra Hale. There's really no short introduction when it comes to Sandra, but I will have to give it a go. Now, Sandra completed a groundbreaking PhD in forensic linguistics and court interpreting back in 2001, right here in Australia. Since then, she's been at the forefront of research that has reshaped how we think about legal interpreting. Her work has influenced interpreter training and policy development worldwide. She's not just a researcher, though. Sandra has actively worked to translate her findings into practical strategies for interpreters, legal professionals, and even the judiciary. And this has included her key role in authoring the recommended national standards for working with interpreters in courts and tribunals, which were launched in 2017. I shall refer to this as RNS throughout the podcast, as it will be a mouthful every single time. Hello, Sandra. Welcome, and thank you so much for accepting my invitation. And may I say what an honour it is to have you here on our podcast. How are you going today?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very well. Looking forward to having a chat.
Oh, likewise. This is a chat I've been dreaming about for quite some time now, and we finally have you here. Sandra, tell me a little bit about how you started this journey. Interpreting, how, why, when did you arrive in Australia? And what made you want to become an interpreter?
I actually did a Jill Blewett lecture for AUSIT. I can't remember now. I think it was 2013 or something, where I talk about this. And when I wrote that, it reminded me that when I was 10 years old in Argentina, not speaking a word of English, I used to play with my cousin that I was an English interpreter. Just, a crazy coincidence. Anyway, then my parents decided to move to Australia 2 years after, or a few years after that. And I was 12, 13 when we came to Australia, so a teenager. So I started high school here in Australia without a word of English.
Was that here in Sydney?
In Sydney, yeah. Yes. And it was very, very difficult, not knowing how to express yourself. So I can see the other side because I've been there. I've been on the other side, being a migrant who didn't speak English, didn't understand anything, who was made fun of at school for, they thought I was stupid.
I can relate to you very, very closely.
And it was difficult because I was used to being a good student back where I came from, to going down to the lowest classes and getting not very good marks because I just couldn't understand. Anyway, that gradually I started to learn and to pick up. But it was an interesting experience. And then because I was the younger of two siblings, I became the most proficient, obviously, because of the age issue. And then I started helping my parents, especially my mum, in communicating. So I understand that side of things as well. And when I went to an information session when I was finishing high school, someone from what was called the MacArthur Institute of Higher Education, which is now Western Sydney University, came to give us brochures about this new degree that was being introduced the year after. So the Bachelor of Arts in Interpreting Translation was the first degree in interpreting translation in New South Wales, and it was being introduced the year that I was due to start a university career. So I thought, that's it. That's what I want to do. So I hadn't seen or heard anything about it except for this brochure that was handed to us, and I thought, this is what I need to do. So it was as if it was.
You've been doing it for the last 5 years for your mum anyway.
Not properly, but it was as if the degree was designed for me. So anyway, so I did that, and I was in the first cohort of the graduates of the Bachelor of Arts in Interpreting Translation, the first bachelor in New South Wales, one of the first in Australia. So I did that. Then after I finished the 3 years, I went back to Argentina to do a 1 year translation course there, which was very good, very illuminating. And when I came back, I was I was working when I got my what used to be called level 2 back then, level 2 NATI accreditation, which was halfway through my degree. I started working as an interpreter here in community settings. And then when I got my then level 3, started working in legal settings. And yes, when I came back from Argentina, I was invited to teach as a casual at now University of Western Sydney, keeps changing names. So I was doing what a lot of people do. So I was interpreting, translating, and doing some casual teaching. So that's how it all started. And as I was practicing, I realized that there were a lot of questions that had not been answered. So I thought, okay, even though I was trained, there were still obviously a lot of questions. So I had questions about how to teach, and I had questions about how to do practice. So I decided to do a diploma of education to learn how to teach properly, and a master's in applied linguistics. And then the master's led to the PhD. And the reason behind starting to do research was to find concrete answers that would help improve the practice. And so pretty much all of my research since then has been motivated by finding answers to real questions to improve the practice. And that's what I've tried to do. And anyway, then I got a full-time position at Western Sydney, and then, became in charge of the programs. I restructured and continued to improve things, introduced the postgraduate degrees. So there's a lot of, obviously I'm not going to tell you everything.
You're going through these like there were some just very easy things that happened overnight. Well, just change the entire program.
No, everything took a long time and a lot of effort, but a lot of passion, a lot of, obviously a lot of good people around me. So it's been a great journey. Then I moved to UNSW in 2011, and obviously I'm there now as well. So it's been great to innovate in terms of research, training, and practice in the community, domestic setting, obviously, because international conference interpreting, that's something that was well developed. But in terms of community settings, Australia is one of the pioneers. So, that it was an open field, and that's a good thing. It can be hard because there's nothing to base it on. So the way that you look at new fields is you look at related areas. So that's why with my PhD, I looked at forensic linguistics. So the language of the law, all of that research that was done surrounding that
and that
field.
was the first PhD in Australia on forensic linguistics and court interpreting, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
What was the question you asked in that?
What I was mostly interested in was, it's a big study with mixed methods. So starting with an exploratory phase, so to see what interpreters were actually doing. So I was very lucky to get the support of the chief magistrate back then and get all these recordings of hearings with interpreters, and I listened to them, transcribed them, analysed them using discourse analysis, and I could see what the trends were. And what I was mostly interested in was accuracy, and the meaning of accuracy being not word for word, but and not even semantic at the sentence level, but at the discourse pragmatic level. And that was my main area in linguistics of pragmatics, and I used that approach to analyse the interpreting. So that was the main phase, but then I also had an experimental phase. I had a questionnaire. So there were different areas.
How long did it take you to complete it?
about 4 years, I think.
4 years.
Yeah. I've worked at it
Fantastic.
quite intensively. Yes.
And you were working
So
full-time at the same time?
I was working full time, yes, and I was using the results of my research to inform my training. So the theoretical parts and the practical parts. So
Doing it all at the same time.
I believe that, there has to be a link. You don't have the theory on one side and the practice on the other. You have to link it up. Okay, so then you have the theory in order to back up your choices. And if you are challenged about your choices, then you can back it up with the theory. You have a reason, why did you make that choice? Not because, I just, that's what came to mind first. It's a systematic choice. It's this reason behind why we do what we do, why we say what we say, how we say, etc. So yes, it's all interrelated.
And when we have a look into your research, and you said internationally there wasn't a lot of research on community interpreting and in particular legal interpreting as well. How was your research perceived and accepted around the world, because it was such a pioneering work and there was so much work done already with conference interpreting?
Yeah.
Internationally, when we say community interpreting, does the conference interpreting academics, do they see it as equal as them? Is it seen a little bit as a lower tier of research? Is it?
Yeah, not in terms of research,
No?
but in terms of practice, there has been this distinction or dichotomy between international settings and domestic settings, where the international settings, mostly known as conference interpreting, the interpreters had been trained, that had been in place for many years, well paid, high status, whereas in the community domestic settings, which started from the need for communication for migrants or refugees, already the status is different, because in international settings, the interpreters are interpreting for international meetings, for professionals, for, whatever it might be, diplomats, so high level situations, whereas in the community setting, it's interpreting for the most vulnerable members of society. And so people who actually really need interpreters because they cannot communicate without them. Whereas in international settings, most of the time, most people will be able to communicate, not always, but most people have English as a lingua franca and so on. So in my book, Community Interpreting, I make that point that, in fact, I think the significance of community interpreters is huge. Yes, that one. Because, you are really removing a language barrier for people to be able to function in their own communities. Because people now live
basic level, right?
at the very basic level, to live in their own adopted communities if they are migrants or refugees, or if they're Aboriginal people in the in the lands, if they're deaf people also, so it's not just for migrants and refugees coming from other countries. It's for people who were born here, so it's not even just for migrants. So it's extremely important, and it's sad that on the one hand the status is low, and that many interpreters themselves think, I'm just an interpreter. There's just, you can hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Or
That's right.
that the pay, the remuneration, the working conditions, that indicates the level of importance that the community give to a certain profession, in this case, our profession. But so there are issues that have concerned me from the beginning, that I strongly believe in equality. I believe that people are all important, regardless of where
Absolutely.
they're from, what language they speak, how much money they have in the bank, that's peripheral. Everybody is important. And so to give more status to someone because they had the luck of, or the effort or whatever it was that put them in a more privileged position over someone who's in a vulnerable position is not something that I agree with. And so, being able to provide a service where people can communicate with each other in a language that they both, let's say, if it's to understand, is crucial. And in situations such as legal and medical, which are really high stakes, it's extremely important that the interpretation be accurate, because if it isn't, then it can do more harm than good. So all of these
There are
issues
hardly any safety nets, right? When it comes to the community interpreting, everything's really bare. I mean, you make a mistake and you're directly impacting people's freedoms, health, potentially.
That's right. And especially because, in international settings, you work as a team, so at least two interpreters working together. Whereas in community settings, most of the time, it's just one person interpreting, with no one else being able to check on whether it's right or wrong, or the accuracy of it, which is something we're trying to change. But you asked me the question, which I didn't answer. How was it received? It was received very well. There was Susan Burke-Seligson from the US had done a really good research project, the Bilingual Courtroom. You may have seen her book in the late 80s, early 90s. So that was a seminal piece of work. So we do similar things. So that was great. There were others like Cecilia Walenshaw in Sweden, a few people here and there who had done good work in community interpreting. But I was granted Doctor Honoris Causa degree at the University of Antwerp for groundbreaking research in community interpreting, which is, a recognition of the importance of the research, which was quite a surprise for me, when I received it. So that was excellent. But no, I mean, the main recognition is that other researchers have used my publications, my research, to either do similar work or cite it to whatever it is that they're writing, PhD students. So that's been great. And obviously I've branched out into many different areas after that, different methods, different areas, different topics, including other languages, not just Spanish. Also surveys of, as you said, judicial officers, tribunal members. So quite a range.
Do you get a notification every time you're cited somewhere?
I don't get a notification, but if you can go to Google Scholar and you can see the profiles of the academics, and that gives you the number of citations over a period of years. So that's the most accessible.
It's not like royalties, though, is it? You don't get $1 for every citation.
No. no, you don't.
Otherwise, you would be as rich as Rolling Stones or something, But I guess it doesn't work.
I don't think so. No. And
you're a rock star for us, Sandra. You're a rock star. You are a rock star.
Academic books don't sell as much as novels, So
I know. It's no Harry Potter, is it?
No.
Tell me, do you remember from your first research? It was in 2001, I think, was your first PhD, right?
That was when I graduated. Yeah.
That was when you graduated.
But I published before that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Does anything come to mind from all the research that you did? What stands out to you? Was there one or two that you said, this one made a huge impact on the industry and so on? Does anything stand out to you?
I think it's an accumulation of all of the research. The first publications raised awareness of the tendencies, of the fact that there was a lot of emphasis on the word level, even in the training, which, seemed to be, okay, well, you need to know all these technical terms, for example. But that's not the most difficult thing to do when you're interpreting. It's actually, and in the community settings, it's actually the colloquial level of language that's very difficult. It's trying, especially when you're interpreting, say, for a witness, it's trying to get the same effect as what the person said, so that the perception of that witness credibility, for example, is equal to what it would have been in the original. So these are all things that were not seen as important because they were not considered. And so what interpreters used to do, still I'm sure they do, but the ones who are trained now are aware of the need to interpret not just what is said, but how it's said. And so the natural tendency is to simplify, to clarify, to disambiguate, to remove any hesitations or any repetitions, so to make it more mechanical, like an AI,
like a robot, like an AI,
a robot would do, right? But what I have said over and over is that an interpreter is like a linguistic actor. So you have to act out the part. You have to sound like a judge when you're interpreting for a judge. You have to sound like the witness when you're interpreting for the witness, for whatever background that witness is, or you know what I mean. So it's when you're watching a movie that's dubbed, if the dubbing is not done properly, it's awful.
Like in Poland, it's like it's the one person doing in some of the Eastern European countries.
Yeah, that's
it's just
right.
one person doing everything,
and they're shocking. You can't follow it because it's not natural. And so that's the same with interpreting, and it's not easy. It's difficult, and that includes idiomatic expressions, vulgar language, anger, anxiety, hesitation, or even the other way around, being assertive. And the research into forensic linguistics has shown, or had shown when I was doing my research, which prompted what I was doing, that in monolingual cases, people are judged not on what they say only, but also, and even more, on how they say it. And so if that works monolingually, it also works bilingually. And then, with my colleagues who I publish with, who have expertise in psychology and law as well, we've done a lot of experimental work where we've shown how the competence of the interpreter can make a difference on the jurors' perceptions. The mode of interpreting, whether it's simultaneous or whether it's consecutive, can also make a difference. The position of all variables can have some type of impact on the evaluation, in this case, of the witness or the defendant or the accused or the suspect or whatever it is. And what we're trying to do is trying to minimize the interferences that interpreters can bring to the mix. So the more you know about it, the more you know about what these interferences may be, the more you can work towards minimizing it to place that person in as similar a position as possible to someone who would not need an interpreter. So you don't want to disadvantage or advantage the situation as an interpreter. You want to be as neutral as possible. And obviously, people have often said, there's no such thing as impartiality for interpreters. And I think it's because the concept is misunderstood. Of course, we all are human and we all have our own subjectivities, partialities, beliefs, etc. And that will, to an extent, influence the way we understand people, because we understand people based, on what we know. And that's why interpreters need to prepare as much as possible, know as much as possible about the situation, about the requirements of the setting, for example, about the reasons why questions are asked in whatever way, about the influence that you may have, so that they can consciously be more objective. So it doesn't mean that you will change your opinion about things, but you try to work beyond your subjectivities. The more you know about a situation, the more objective you can be. It seems like a bit of a contradiction, but that's the way it works, because you are aware of things. It's like one of the exercises I do with students is I get them to hear someone speaking with hesitations, and then they haven't learned about the need to keep hesitations in the interpreting. But once you teach them about the purpose of hesitations or the effect of the hesitations and how they need to keep it, then they start to hear them. Because if you're not aware of it, you don't hear it, because automatically your brain scans out the things that seem to be superfluous. That's what we do, to help our brain function. But when you're an interpreter, you have to be aware of the importance of these hesitations, discourse markers, repetitions, etc., whatever it may be, rapport features, etc., because they have a purpose in discourse, which as an interpreter you need to understand in order to keep in an accurate way. So yes, there are difficulties because we are people, not that machines can do it better, but it can be achieved to the best of our skill and ability as far as it is humanly possible. And what we found in our experimental research is that we found that there were no significant differences, and that's what we have to look at statistically. No statistically significant differences when the interpreters interpreted accurately, with all of the limitations of accuracy, in the perception of credibility, for example, of the accused. This is just one example. But when they don't interpret accurately, removing hesitations, discourse markers, or creating their own, etc., there are significant differences. So again, with the difference between consecutive and simultaneous, we found that simultaneous interpreting there's no significant differences between simultaneous interpreting and the monolingual control, when people listen to the person speaking in the same language and when they hear the interpreter through headphones. But when they see the interpreter and the interpreter interprets consecutively, then in one of our studies, through the interpreter, the evaluations were significantly more positive about the accused.
I was going to say about the accused. Now, it's got to be harder with consecutive to keep the discourse markers and the pauses in there. Not only do you have to remember what was being said, but, where did the, let's say, witness in this instance, where did the witness pause? Where did they hesitate? Where did they put a discourse marker? It's much harder doing this in consecutive.
Exactly.
Whereas in simultaneous, this would be more natural and would be easier, I would assume, right?
That's right. Because in consecutive, what you remember is the general tone. So you remember whether the person was assertive or hesitant. That you can keep, but you can't remember exactly where the pause was. Where unless you're very, your interpretation is very short. But yes, it's a lot more difficult. And in fact, we found in another study that we did, we found that consecutive interpreting is cognitively more taxing because you have to take notes. You have, you're distracted, and it's also distracting for the jurors because they have to wait. They hear one segment they understand, another segment they don't understand, so they get distracted. And then they have to remember what the previous segment was, before they hear the next one. So, yes, I mean, there's no doubt that simultaneous interpreting is optimal. And
it would also
hopefully,
be... Sorry, you go.
No, hopefully we will get to a point where, at least in trials, we will have two simultaneous interpreters working like they do in the international courts,
That's where I want to bring it to, because I think it would also be cheaper for the courts to run a simultaneous interpreter, because it'll take shorter. It'll take half the time, right? Around there. Around there. So, I mean, if we go to the courts and say, well, invest in some technology, you could actually save money in the long run because your trials will take shorter.
Yeah.
We'll go for shorter.
Of course, this can only happen with the top languages for which we have good programs. And in fact, it has been done. I know of at least one trial in Mandarin in Western Australia where the judge organised the conference interpreting equipment, got the interpreters ahead of time, got the ones who were not trained by an experienced interpreter. So, and it worked really well. So it can happen, and it has happened, but we need a will. And obviously it won't happen for all languages. But it's something and I've always said that, the obstacles along the way in this more than 30 years that I've been working in this field, I've always come across obstacles saying, but you can't do it for all languages, so you can't do it at all. And the idea is that you can't go to the lowest common denominator. Start with the languages for which you can do the best practice, and then others will catch up. But if you go to the lowest common denominator, then everybody will be dragged down. So, and things have improved. In the last 30-odd years, I've seen things improve. When I first started, well, for a start, very few interpreters had been trained who worked in the community, and they wondered why we were wasting our time going to university. I remember that was the reaction from some. Why are you wasting your time going to university? I never had to go to university, and I'm an interpreter. So that was one reaction. So it wasn't considered to be, not even by interpreters, to be a worthwhile profession. Two, there was a lot of misunderstanding about the role of the interpreter. There was a lot of, what we could consider unethical behaviour going on, and I'm sure it still is, but not to the same extent. There was, NAATI was in its infancy, training programs were in their infancy. Everything was starting out and trying to figure out. There was hardly any research, so things were not based on the results of research. Professional association only started. So everything is so much better now. And also,
everything...
Yeah, no, but
it's come a long way so quickly by the sounds of it.
Well, exactly.
There's a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
A lot of hard work went in. I think simultaneously, a lot of people were doing research at the same time.
Yeah.
So it did flourish, didn't it, quite quickly?
Yes, that's right. It grows. It's cumulative. And also, another great source of pride, you can say, or satisfaction, is to see a lot of the people who went through the programs now being leaders. So, well, like you, although you didn't come to Sydney, but Erica, who was my PhD student, was your lecturer, and so it
Absolutely.
is, it just spreads out, and we have a lot more people now working in a concerted way to make things happen, and that's great. And the other thing I was going to tell you, if 30 years ago you were to ask me, do you think that we'll ever have a document such as the recommended national standards? Do you think that we will have judges being champions of interpreters? I would have said, oh, you're crazy. That's la la land. And, people take it for granted.
And then I would say,
yeah.
You will be saying this in 30 years' time. You would definitely not believe me, right?
Well, hopefully in 30 years' time, the remuneration will all be fixed and all the working conditions will be wonderful.
Hopefully it won't take that long, but at this rate it might be.
I remember one of the, Lindsay Hayward, I think his name was, one of the NAATI CEOs, so there was... Cheryl Bell was the first one, and after her, I'm pretty sure his name was Lindsay Hayward. And I remember when he gave his, I don't know if it was a Jill Blewett lecture, and he did say at that stage, because I think, yes, that's right, so NAATI turned 30 years. He said, and I always remember that, he said, 30 years in the development of a profession is very short. And it is,
Yeah.
I mean, we get frustrated because obviously we want things to happen within our lifetime, right? But if we look at other professions, they've been developing for hundreds of years. And we can say, okay, interpreting is also a 1,000-year-old or 2,000 years old or whatever from the beginning. One of the oldest professions, but not for community interpreting, not for this type of thing. So as a regulated profession in Australia, we can, date it back to the establishment of NAATI, we can say. Right, because that's
and
when...
look at NAATI now as well, with the certified specialist legal interpreting,
that's
certified specialist healthcare interpreting. So it's good to see that they're in line with the research as well.
That's right.
They're in line with the latest achievements of our profession.
That's right.
And you had a hand in that too, I'm pretty sure, didn't you, with the specialization of these two.
Yes, in 2011, I was, there was a call for expressions of interest, and I created a consortium of universities, researchers and so on, and we did the review. We did what was called the INT report. It was the Improvement to NAATI Testing report, but we did more than look at the testing itself. We looked at the whole thing, so it was a whole overview of NAATI, and within that we had the recommendations for the different layers of certification, including the specializations, compulsory pre-certification training to a minimum degree, degree as in level. Before that, you didn't have to have anything to go and sit for the test. You just went
That's right.
and sat for the test. So also the other pre-test knowledge, such as, well, the ethical knowledge, but also the bilingual knowledge, so that people wouldn't just waste their time and their money. So you can read the INT report is there, but that's what led to the whole restructure of NAATI. And NAATI, started the new system in 2018 with the new certification system, and the pre and post requirements for professional development as well, recertification, etc., which aligns it with other professions that require their professionals, or even trades, to recertify, to do professional development, to keep up to date with the skills, with the knowledge, etc. Some people didn't like it, as you might have heard. Some people thought that they had their accreditation forever and no one was going to tell them to do anything extra because, they've reached the peak. And of course you can't, please everybody, but the idea is to improve the profession as a whole for the benefit of everybody, not just a few. And again, there are some in some languages who are very highly qualified, trained, competent, but others who are just beginning. So you have to try and bring up the ones that are at the bottom and keep the ones at the top level as well, so that they can continue to improve and to keep the skills. But the one thing that saddens me is that, okay, we've done all of this on the one side to improve the certification system, the PD, the training, etc., not for all languages, unfortunately, but that's improving as well. But on the other side, so that's all on the interpreters and translators side, but on the other side, the remuneration and working conditions, that hasn't really improved that much. So if at all,
Anything's gone backwards.
Yeah. So that's really concerning, because when we talk about the sustainability of the profession, if people don't get paid enough and they don't get treated with respect, they don't have the satisfaction that you have to continue in a profession, they will leave. And unfortunately, a lot of our good graduates have left because of those reasons. And that's something that, as a profession, we keep talking about it, but we need to continue to try and find solutions. And it's encouraging that there are some groups doing some reviews and reports and so on at the moment, that hopefully will lead to recommendations and improvements in that area.
Absolutely, hopefully. And I was talking to Lee Cox from Department of Home Affairs in just the last episode, and this was one of our talking points about procurement and the sustainability as well. So, I mean, as I said to him as well, it's an exciting time to be within our profession, at least to see that whole sustainability thing going up and moving upwards and onwards. And like we said, let's hope it doesn't take 30 years.
Yeah.
But I think there is some movement happening there, and hopefully it is sooner rather than later. But absolutely, we can't expect constantly us interpreters to be better and better and keep all these high standards when, like you said, they're not making enough money to pay the rent, and they're not being respected like all other professions might be. So hopefully that is going to change. Let's talk about the RNS for a little bit. So the Recommended National Standards for Working with Interpreters in Courts and Tribunals. There, I said it.
Yes.
We've had a few episodes on this. I spoke to the wonderful Ludmilla as well about her most recent research on the implementation of RNS. So our viewers and listeners know quite a bit about what the RNS is, but just in a nutshell, Can you please, and because, I've got the mother of the RNS here, I've got the author here, tell me a little bit about what the RNS is. What did they end up being what you wanted or imagined they were going to be? Or are they even better now than what you thought they were going to be? What is the RNS?
Yeah, so I'll give you a bit of background because maybe most people wouldn't know this. But there was a conference in Western Australia in 2009, I think it was, organised by the AIJA, the Australasian Institute for Judicial Administration. And I was one of the keynote speakers, I think, one of the speakers there, or plenary or keynote, I can't remember. Anyway, there was an open discussion. It was working with interpreters in Australia, in courts and tribunals. And there was a lot of open discussion, and it was obvious that there was no consistency throughout jurisdictions, states, etc., about policies, how to work with interpreters, etc., etc. So the AIJA gave me some funding after that to do a national survey of interpreters and of judicial officers and tribunal members. So I did that, and that resulted in the 2011 AIJA report, which is about policies and practices working with interpreters in courts and tribunals. And that had, I think, 16 recommendations at the end. So it's an interesting read. It's short because it gives you the perspectives of both sides. So on the one hand, you hear the judicial officer saying the interpreters are, I'm not very happy with the quality, et cetera, not all of them, but, you get that. And on the other hand, you get the interpreter's perception or perspective saying, well, we're not treated well enough, we need this, we need that. But so dissatisfaction from both sides. So anyway, so one of those, the last recommendation was to create a national protocol on how to work with interpreters, because we did a review, and Sylvia Martinez was my research assistant for that, so she'll remember.
Hi, Sylvia.
She was a student first, and then she worked as a research assistant on that. And we did a review of the policies. So we looked for the policies on working with interpreters or people who didn't speak English, et cetera, et cetera. They were nice, good policies all over the place. But most of the time people didn't know where to find them, or, there was, again, no consistency. They were all over the place. Some in bench books, some in guidelines, some in policies. Anyway, so that recommendation was to create a national protocol on working with interpreters in courts and tribunals, so that there would be one document where everybody would go to, and instead of having to, where's that, everyone will go to one, everyone will do the same things, and everything will be clear. So I presented this at conferences and so on, different parts of Australia, and the reaction I got mostly was that because in Australia we have a state-based legal system, it would be impossible to have a national protocol. So the different jurisdictions, like the Northern Territory, based on these recommendations and on what was in the report and other things, created their own protocols, and some put it in the bench books, etc., etc. So there were bits and pieces everywhere, but it still wasn't a national protocol. And I thought, that's that's not very good that they're saying it's impossible. Then in 2015, I get a letter from the chair of the newly created Judicial Council for Cultural Diversity, JCCD it was called.
JCCD.
And this, the now retired Supreme Court Justice, Wayne Martin from WA, was the chair. And he sent me a letter to me and to another retired judge from Darwin, Dean Mildren, to if we would like to do this national protocol as the recommendation as per the report. That the JCCD thought that this was a good opportunity for the two of us to write a national protocol where I would concentrate on the interpreting side of things and Dean Mildren will concentrate on the legal side of things. So I thought, wow, this is all the Christmases come at once. I didn't think that this was possible. They said it wasn't possible, and now I get invited to do this. I said, of course, this is great. And then in conversations, after we agreed to do it in conversations with different people, it was decided that instead of doing a protocol, it would be a bigger document, including more people, not just the two of us. So a committee was created, which was this subcommittee of the JCCD, under the chair of, I was going to say chairmanship, but she's a woman, under as the chairpersonship of Justice Melissa Perry. So this was the subcommittee that worked on the writing of the national recommended standards, and so it had representation from the judiciary, tribunal members, other legal professionals, NATI, and interpreting, obviously. I was the AUSIT president then, so I wore two hats. Magdalena Rowan was there with me as well. So we had, a good group, and within that group, some really active members of that group, including Justice Francois Kunz, who has become, one of our champions for interpreters.
I know.
So
he speaks so well about it too.
Yeah, no, he's very good. So we've got and that created the recommended national standards. The first one was launched in 2017, and then we continued with more people coming on board from different areas, and more judges who again are the ones who are implementing everything and doing a wonderful job, and interpreters love them. They stand out. Judge Jane Culver is one who, from New South Wales, people always make good comments about. Now I can't remember her name, but another judge in Queensland. Anyway, so then a few things were updated. Materials were created, so materials for training of lawyers, of judicial officers. So on that website, now it's called the JCDI, so Judicial Council for Diversity and Inclusion now. So there are videos that can be used. Then there were campaigns which happened all around the country, et cetera, to raise the awareness. And then this research, ARC research linkage grant that Ludmilla is leading, I'm also working on that. We went around the country to observe and look at the way that they were being implemented, how many people knew about it, and people who didn't know about it, etc. Interviewed.
Generally, how was it? I don't want to go too much into detail. That's another 2-hour webinar.
It's not consistent. So mostly in Sydney and Melbourne, where interpreters know more about it. And this is one thing that I found out personally, that going to observe the courts and talking to the interpreters, if the interpreters were members of AUSIT, they were fully aware. If they were not, even when they had been trained as masters, highest levels of training, they were not members of AUSIT, they had no clue. So about the recommended standards, because they're isolated. This is a profession where you need to join the professional association, plug for AUSIT now, because that's what unites you, and that's what
before the 30th of June.
That's right, exactly. So that was one interesting finding. Another one was that yes, some magistrates, judges, I could watch them and say, okay, they know all about it. They've probably done the training that I do for judicial officers, which I've been doing for over 20 years, through the National Judicial College, 1 hour in an induction session that they do for a week on different areas. That's for the new judges.
Is that just for new judges, or
new judges,
do you train the more seasoned judges as well?
No, well, the regular training is for new judges and new magistrates.
It's for new judges.
Yes. But then they do other things like conferences or other workshops or whatever. Also tribunal members, I've done training for them as well. So, I would sit in a court and know that this person had been trained, this judge or this magistrate. Perfect. Everything ran smoothly. And when you had the interpreter who was also trained, there was, it was a dream to watch. And then you'd go to another one where...
How often did that happen?
Not too unusual for some courts.
Okay.
But then there were others who, knew nothing. It was all shambolic. So it depended, and that's the thing. It's such a big beast, we can call it, just the courts alone, and we've got the courts, we've got the judicial officers, we've got the tribunals, we've got the state versus Commonwealth, we've got the criminal versus civil, we have the lawyers, the police, and the interpreters, or the court officers, the court administration, the registrars, so many, so the language service providers. So a lot of people have been working towards raising awareness, and that's the number one thing. What you start raising awareness, then people start to think about it, and then they might go and read the document and learn. But what I say to the people that I train, that most of your questions will be answered in the recommended national standards. And that's the beauty of that document, that it's a document that is for everybody who participates in the legal system when there are interpreters involved. So for the administration, for the judicial officers, tribunal members, for the lawyers, and for interpreters. Everybody can read what everybody else's roles are, so you can learn that way as well. There's the standards.
You know what to expect from the other parties.
You know what to expect from the other parties.
Yeah.
So you have the standards for each of these participants in a short dot point format. And then you have annotated standards for each of those with expanded material to explain why the standard is what it is and where it comes from, because this is an accumulation of years of research and best practice and so on. So it's all there. So even for interpreters who have not had the benefit of going through a university or even a TAFE program, if they read this, they'll learn a lot, because it's pretty much all summarized in this document. So it's got that. That's the main part, the standards, annotated standards. Yeah.
Just pause you there. We say that, not all languages are offered formal training at tertiary level, whether it be vocational education or higher education, but there's absolutely no one stopping an interpreter going to the JCDI website and downloading this document for free. For free. Reading it, and it's all very well explained. And I'm pretty sure if they wanted to ask a question about it, they could contact you, they could contact me, they could contact OSIT.
Exactly.
So interpreters out there, especially those of you who haven't received formal training, this document has been put together over decades, you're saying, decades of research. Right. So please get your hands on it, download it, print it out, make notes on it. It's there for you. It's not there for anyone else, right?
Yeah.
Sorry,
and then it's got appendices and annexures, which are very useful for extra information. But what I've advised interpreters to do is to take it with them when they go interpreting. And so if they ask for, something that they need, such as a break or a briefing or whatever it is that they need, and they say, no, you can't have that, then open it up to the right page and show them, okay, this is what the recommended national standards say, and that's what I'm asking. I'm not making this up. So, some people have encountered resistance even after doing that, but there's only so much resistance you can get if you keep showing where it is, right? You have to be confident to do it, and you'll get some people who will say, oh, wow, great, I didn't know about this. Thank you for informing me. I'll read it, right? You'll get some who are at the other extreme and think that, you can't tell me what to do because
who are you to tell me what to do?
Who are you to tell me what to do?
Right.
And that's
these people are in ultimate power in that
That's right, yes.
And then this casual, when I say casual, this court worker who's not there every day.
That's right.
Just comes in and tells this pretty much the god of that room and say, you got to read this. You're not doing it right.
That's right.
I mean, it's like that can't be easy for an interpreter to do.
No,
right?
exactly, and that's why it requires confidence, competence, and an ability to negotiate in a nice, polite, collegial way. The interpreter can't be arrogant either. Because, if you go with arrogance and say, well, you have to do this because otherwise, blah, 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 that's not going to go down very well. So you have to know how to open the conversation and how to explain it in a way that they realize that it's in their own interest. Because, the interpreter is there to serve those people who cannot communicate with each other. So if the interpreter is not given the right tools in order to do a proper job, the people who are at a disadvantage, it's not really the interpreter. The interpreter will then go and forget about it, right? That's no longer the concern afterwards. It's those people who remain with that case. It's their concern if the interpretation wasn't done properly, if it wasn't accurate, if it was, whatever. It didn't serve the purpose that it should have, because they weren't given the appropriate tools. They weren't given the adequate working conditions in order to do a proper job. So, I keep saying the best interpreter will not be able to interpret accurately if they're not given adequate conditions. If they work by themselves
Absolutely.
for long hours with no breaks, if they are not briefed, if someone reads at top speed, and if it's, the technical material that they never heard of, no one can do that. It's impossible, no matter how good you are. And the irony is that it's the good interpreters who will ask for repetition, for explanation, for briefing. It's the bad interpreters who will keep quiet. And yet when some, legal professionals don't understand or have never read the RNS, they think that the ones who don't ask are the good ones and the ones who ask are the bad ones. It's the opposite.
Now, look, I have experienced on two different occasions where one of the judges said, "Mr. Interpreter, can you please stop humming? Why do you always, what's this humming going in the background all the time?" And I said, I'm really sorry, Your Honor, I have to interpret everything that you say to keep this person linguistically present. That's why I'm interpreting simultaneously. That's why there's a little bit of a hum going. It's like, oh, it is annoying, but I guess I'll have to let you do that. On the other end, we were there were two interpreters, and of the same language, Turkish, two for one for each client. And I was humming again, I was interpreting, but there was no noise coming from the other side. And the judge stopped the proceedings and said, "Madame Interpreter, there's a lot of noise coming from Mr. Interpreter. There's no noise coming from you. Why aren't you interpreting? You should be interpreting everything that is being said simultaneously to your client." And this all happened within maybe a week or two of each other.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow, it's just two extremes. And maybe the other interpreter knew that they had to do it simultaneously, but they got told off the week before, so they weren't doing it.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, and it's being consistent, because if all interpreters know what they should be doing and they do it and they ask for the same things, then people will expect that. And that's happening with some of our colleagues whom we know who are champions for the RNS, like Cynthia, Sylvia
Lee,
Sylvia
absolutely.
Martinez. They go to the courts and they ask for the hearing loop, so that they can use the simultaneous interpreting equipment and sit somewhere else, not next to the accused in the dock whispering in the ear. And at first, or if it's the first time they've asked, they've encountered resistance. But then the second time, the third time, then the court officers come with the loop already, and they don't even have to ask for it. So that's the way it works. You just have to educate people. And yes, there have been some unfortunate situations, and that's why AUSIT implemented, which was one of the recommendations in the RNS, to implement a feedback mechanism where interpreters could give feedback on how the RNS are being implemented. And so on the AUSIT website, on the front page, on the home page, there is a button that you can click on to give feedback on the RNS, and it takes you to a form. And that's where you can share with everybody your experiences in working in courts and tribunals in relation to how the RNS have been implemented. And we've had we started this.
How's that feedback mechanism going?
We started this.
Are you getting a lot of feedback?
Yeah, we started 2 years ago. This is the we've got 3. Yes, so this is the second year. So we've got 3 reports that have been already submitted. So we do 2 reports per year. So 2 reports from last year and 1 report already from this year. So the next one will be at the end of the year. So the feedback has been mixed. Some excellent feedback from some courts that have been great to interpreters who have done everything right, some of the judges in particular, and some mediocre feedback and some really bad feedback. And so those reports I've been sending to the subcommittee of the CDI. Nothing much has been done with it except to raise awareness. But now that subcommittee is reforming, so hopefully, things will start to liven up a bit again. But also, it's good. It's not. Some interpreters, I think, misunderstood this as going to the police and reporting a crime, right? And then the police would have to follow up on the crime. This is not it, because it's not a crime, number one, and two, AUSIT is not the police, and nor is the JCDI. So it's not something that, okay, you report it and it's going to be fixed the next day. It's an awareness raising exercise again. And it's there on the AUSIT website. You can download the reports. It's there for anybody to read. And so you can see what other colleagues have gone through, what they've done, what the issues have been, and you can contribute with your own. So, and you can use it if you're doing presentations, or if if you're training people how to work with interpreters, to show them some of the examples. So there are some interesting examples there of situations that have happened, and some.
I guess they're all anonymized.
They're anonymized, yes.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting. It's another step towards raising awareness, improving communication, sharing information. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. And when it comes to monitoring the standards, we say that with the recommended national standards, there is that feedback mechanism, especially for how the judicial officers are working with these interpreters, or how good or how bad. What about the interpreters and their standards? Are the judicial officials, for example, can they go somewhere and give feedback? What do we do about the standards of the interpreters?
That's right. That was the other side of the equation, that they were supposed to create something similar, but because they're so big, there's no one body that they can give feedback to. It's not as streamlined as we have done through AUSIT. Wow,
we're doing something better than them.
Well, I encourage judicial officers and tribunal members to speak up, to have more say, because normally they tell me, well, we don't know who the interpreter is that we're going to be assigned, because they don't recruit them. So they just get whoever they get. But I encourage them to have more say. If they get a good interpreter, to praise the interpreter, to make a comment somewhere, to give feedback through whoever it is that recruits them, to ask for them to come back, to ask for the best qualified interpreters. Don't take it. So, for example, in the RNS, there is one good annexure that shows, and Nati did this, shows the languages according to tiers. So the tier A languages are the languages for which there are multiple interpreters at the highest levels of certification. Then tier B is the next one, then tier C is the next one. So if, I tell the judges, if, you are requiring, let's say Spanish, for argument's sake, a Spanish interpreter for a trial, hopefully two, and they send you a provisional interpreter, you should reject that, because there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't have a certified interpreter and even a certified specialist interpreter, because we have them in Spanish, we have them in Arabic, in Mandarin, etc., etc. So the same as telephone interpreting, that's another trend that's becoming, unfortunately, more prominent.
Well, it's a cheaper option, isn't it? I mean, when you have a look at it,
it's cheaper, and that's
that's the reason. It's
that's
cheaper.
The reason.
It's cheaper, yeah.
And that's something that, again, with this group, the subcommittee, we are talking about what to do with regards to that, because we really need a concerted effort from everybody to stop this from happening. From the interpreters refusing hearings over the phone, from the LSPs telling whoever is asking them for this to say, no, this is inappropriate, from the judicial officers, tribunal members to say, no, we can't work with a telephone interpreter. Everybody has to do something to stop this practice. Otherwise, because it's the
Absolutely.
cheapest, it's going to be the only thing that we end up with, and it's going to be to the detriment of everybody.
I see a number of health professionals throughout my year in my life. My counsellor is one of them, and I'm proud to say it that I've got her on a regular 2-monthly cycle, and we just talk about my life. Now, sometimes I see her face to face, sometimes I see her via video, sometimes we have our conversations over the phone. She doesn't charge me any less.
Well, exactly.
I mean, now I'm thinking I should be like, hello, can you please charge me less for this because we did this over the telephone?
That's
and
right.
then she would say, well, I gave you the same service, whether
Yes.
it be face to face, via
Yeah.
video, or telephone. Maybe that's where this
That's where
we start
it
figuring
can
this
start.
out.
Yeah, it can start
Everything
by
is the same
charging.
price.
No, in fact, I think you should charge more for telephone because it's more difficult.
It's harder.
It's more
Yes,
difficult because you have no
absolutely.
visual cues. So telephone
Nothing.
interpreting should be the most expensive and the worst performance because the researchers found that. Then audiovisual is the next one that should be a little bit less expensive. And then face-to-face should be the cheapest. But
Yeah.
include, obviously, for face-to-face, you have to include travel time and,
Travel time,
transport and that sort of thing. But that's the only thing that will stop this trend. And, that's another piece of research that we conducted where we compared the performance of interpreters face-to-face compared to audiovisual compared to telephone interpreting. And we found that trend downwards, so telephone being the worst. But we found no significant differences between the audiovisual and the face-to-face. The performance was slightly worse with audiovisual, but it wasn't significantly different, which means that if you have to opt for remote interpreting because, let's say, there's no one in central New South Wales that is qualified to do a court case, then you can do a remote interpreting job, but do it as we are doing it now through audiovisual means. We've got the technology now.
Absolutely. But it's I think it's habits, it's trends. We need to make sure we got over this whole telephone interpreting thing sooner rather than later, because during COVID I think video interpreting kind of like peaked and we're like, oh wow, this is really going to take over telephone interpreting. Wow, amazing. And then all of a sudden, boom.
Yes.
Video remote interpreting went down again, and telephone's probably the go-to remote interpreting mode again, isn't it?
And there are so many disadvantages to it, not only in terms of the performance, which inevitably will be worse for interpreters because of the extra cognitive load and because of the lack of visual cues. Also, the protocols are never set in place. So it's just, okay, let's do whatever happens. If you're going to do remote interpreting, there has to be very specific protocols because the people on the other side who are seeing everything have to tell the interpreter what's happening, who's speaking, who is looking at whom. All of those things have to be...
Where are you pointing at?
Yeah, where are you pointing? Because otherwise the interpreter cannot understand what's going on and cannot interpret. The other thing that is an issue is that there's no guarantee that the interpreter will be in a private place. So it's been known that interpreters have done telephone interpreting on the bus, on the train, anywhere that's not. So this, this whole thing about confidentiality, where legal professionals are reluctant to give interpreters any briefing, any materials to prepare, and yet when it comes to telephone interpreting, they don't care who is around them, who's reading or hearing or anything. There's absolutely no confidentiality. The whole family could be listening in. The whole community could be listening in. They don't know who's around them. There's no way of checking. So with audiovisual, yes, you've got more control. But with audio only, telephone, there's no way of knowing. So there are so many things against it. But anyway, that's another battle that we need to tackle.
Well, yes, let's. There's quite a lot of battles on different fronts, but we're just going to keep at it, right?
Yes.
Look, thank you so much, Sandra. We can talk about this for hours, and we'll call you back and see how it's all going again. To end on a hopeful note, clearly we've got the feedback mechanism now, and you're saying that there's a lot of positive comments there as well. I wanted to ask you, was there a huge difference like between the magistrates' courts and the higher courts when it came to the understanding of the judicial officers of the RNS? Was it more understood and welcome in the higher courts?
Yes. I mean, that's a reality that in the higher courts, they have more resources, more time.
More time.
Yeah, so it's more, they organize things in advance so they can plan in advance. So yes, it's a lot more feasible for the RNS to be implemented in the higher courts. And that's understandable. That's something that interpreters need to understand too, that they can't ask for the same level of support in the local court, because the local court is the filter court. It's the busiest court. The magistrates don't know
it's where everything
what will
starts,
happen.
right?
Yeah, everything starts. So it's not as if they can do anything beforehand to help interpreters. But what we need to do is work around the limitations. So, some interpreters have been talking to the prosecution, for example, before a hearing starts. And then they can feed them in, or to the lawyers that are there, the legal aid or lawyers or whoever the lawyers are. Or if no one else has briefed them, then it's up to the magistrate to start at the beginning and do a little bit of a briefing with the interpreter to make sure that the interpreter knows what's going on. And that is also in their interest, because if it's an interpreter who is not trained, for example, who's never done any interpreting, who doesn't know about the ethics of the profession, it's in the interest of the court to make sure that this interpreter at least has some basis to know what they have to do. In some languages, that's a reality. So it's a matter of taking interpreting seriously as part of a bilingual hearing, a bilingual case. And there are so many inefficiencies in the courts that should be looked into, which would fix the situation. And I know that some efforts are being made to improve things. But again, it has to be a concerted effort. And on a positive note, to end on a positive note, I think we have to be positive. We always have to be positive, because if we're negative, then we don't do anything, right? We just say, why bother? And we have to be positive. We know that things have improved. I know that some people are having trouble seeing it, but I can guarantee that, as I said, I've seen huge improvements over the last 30 years. If you went back, it would be a very different world. But obviously there's a lot more to do still, and in particular with regards to pay and conditions, working conditions. But also I think there is a responsibility on interpreters to maintain the standards in terms of the performance, but also in terms of what they will accept. So if pressure is put on from the interpreters to not accept telephone interpreting, for example, not accept less than a certain fee, if everybody does the same, then it will be a lot easier to achieve. But if you have interpreters undercutting others and taking anything no matter what, and doing anything because they're asked to do it, then it's very difficult to have a united front and to make any changes. And that's why OZIT is so important, to be a united front, because it's easier, it's more productive to work as a group rather than as a person, by yourself. And that's why the RNS are so important too, because it's not just the lone interpreter's voice. It's in a document that has been signed off by the Council of Chief Justices. So, it's not it's not Sandra Hale who signed off on it, it's the Council of Chief Justices. So it's an important document. It's not something that should be dismissed. So that's something that will help interpreters back up the request as well. So I'd say I understand the frustrations. I get very frustrated too. And I understand that some people cannot stay in the profession if they don't have enough work, and if they don't, it's not enough to pay the rent or put food on the table, and that's totally understandable. And that's why we need to also help these other initiatives, like what you were just saying from Home Affairs. These reviews or reports,
The sustainability
sustainability
reports, yeah.
review, help them so that they can help us. And that's another great thing. There are a lot of good people around who want to help, who want to
Absolutely,
do
I
the right
believe in
thing.
this. I believe in this. Yeah.
So it's always good to have a positive attitude, because negativity will never. Well, I don't think negativity leads to positive change. That's my way of seeing things. I think working collaboratively, trying to get more people on board, to get champions to help us. I think that's the most productive and satisfying way of achieving positive results.
Let's do some plugs then before we leave. First of all, let's all become OSIT members, interpreters,
Yes.
translators out there. We explained all the amazing reasons why you should. And like I said as well, and the financial year's coming up.
Yes.
So I've gotten my second reminder to renew my membership, so I need to do that this week.
Yes.
So do that.
Also, with OSIT, we need people. Don't join just to get, but to give. So if you can see that something is not working right, join and help fix it. So that's very important. We need everybody's talents.
And it's a really amazing place to actually communicate with people as well. Now we've got these forums on there, language groups on there, and it's becoming more than just a website. It's a learning space. It's a community space, and it's not just about be a member and get cheaper webinars and get your PD points and whatnot. It's this amazing resource, and now it is a place of community as well. And hopefully it'll become bigger and bigger. Hopefully, all of the interpreters out there are also OSIT members, and I feel less of a solitary interpreter now that I am an OSIT member. And it's not just about your language as well. It's all the other languages, and you feel united. I definitely agree within that regard, because we work alone as interpreters and translators almost all the time, and there is no sense of belonging.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think with OSIT, that addresses that situation too. Okay, first plug done. Second plug, get onto the JCDI website and download the recommended national standards. And don't just download it, read it, whether you like to read it on
the train
e-device or you like to print it out old school, go to your library, print it out, make notes. There used to be a physical copy that you could order back in the day. I don't know if that's still a thing.
I don't think so, but you can download it, yeah.
But you can easily download it and read it. Do that, definitely. And we said, especially for those interpreters out there who have not received the formal training, and some of the things in there, most of it, if not all of it, is actually taught in tertiary institutions, but we know that so many languages don't have this opportunity, but it doesn't stop them from having access to this amazing training document too, right?
That's right. Also, there are other resources that they can, download or watch, videos and so on from the website as well. Yeah.
Plug 3, the feedback mechanism on the OSIT website.
Yes.
Positive, negative, and it's not necessarily, like we said, reporting a crime. It's not Crime Stoppers, but we do need your feedback there to build also that the world of data there, so that you can report back to the JCDI, right? And you can also access the reports that have already been published.
That's right.
Yep. So if you're an interpreter, you've got the data there. If you're an interpreter trainer, you can use it within your training as well. So that's plug number 3, OSIT website, get on the feedback mechanism. You can give feedback. You can also read the previously published reports as well. 1, 2, 3, get on it.
Yes. Number 4 is if you have a language for which there are courses, either at TAFE or at university, consider doing them, because it is worth doing it. Yes, and we have many languages, and we do also online programs now. So even if if you are not able to go face to face, you can join us online as well. At UNSW, obviously that's where I am, but other places as well around the country.
No, you're 100% right. I just want to say that when I did my master's degree, and the 2 years that I spent there and coming out of it, I was a completely changed interpreter and translator, completely changed. I absolutely loved it. And it has changed my approach to my everyday practice of interpreting translation. So I definitely recommend it as a practitioner who went through the training. I was lucky enough, my language was offered. Doesn't matter which state you're in these days. Like you said, Sandra, almost all institutions are offering their the training online now as well. So, you have a bigger market to choose from. Who do you want to learn from?
That's right.
Every university would have their strengths and weaknesses, let's say, or different kind of courses. Who do you want to learn from? Where do you want to learn from? So you've got access now, and also there's some scholarships as well sometimes. UNSW did it with Multicultural New South Wales, I believe. RMIT University is doing it with the Victorian state government, as well as NATI as well. So get on the websites of either the government websites or the university websites, have a look for scholarships, and most of the time you can there'll be help vet available or HEX available
that's right.
as well. And more these days you have non-language specific courses as well, and at the very least there's a skill set course that gives you some basic level training, but nonetheless gives you some training. So there's a lot of options out there for you. Like you said, Sandra, consider doing one of those courses.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It has been an amazing time chatting to you. You have answered so many questions that I didn't even think about asking, to be honest with you. You made it so easy for me. I thank you so much for your time, and it is such an honor to have you. And I think we are so lucky as Australian interpreters to have you. You're our Sandra Hale. You are our pride and honor when we go overseas and we talk about you. So thank you very much for the decades of work you've put into it as a trainer, as a policy writer, as an interpreter, as a past AUSIT president. And, I wish you many, many healthy and happy years in our profession. And I look forward to having many conversations with you over the next 30 years.
Well, I don't know about the next 30 years, but thank you, Fatigue, for all those kind words. And, there are so many people who are working in this. It's not just me. And I really want to thank everybody and thank you for all the work that you do and for, this podcast, which is very, very useful, and for everything else that you do, including teaching and sharing your talents and skills. So thank you, everybody. And let's hope that more people get involved.
Like you say, we're a big team, aren't we?
Exactly.
Our whole profession, everyone is so talented, and we can all learn from each other.
And everyone's needed.
Absolutely. Don't leave. Don't go anywhere. Hopefully, we'll all make this world a lot better. Like you say, right. I don't want to think like a utopic world, but I'm a natural positive thinker as well.
That's right. Anyway,
Sandra, thank you
very much for things. Okay.
I'll see you again soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. You have been with us with the Conversations TNI podcast. Today I had the wonderful Professor Sandra Hale from the University of New South Wales. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so that you can get updates on the new episodes. Thanks very much, and see you later.
Conversations podcast.